You know, I was gonna start tonight by telling a really dumb story about how I lost a fight, and we're going to talk about David and Goliath. But before we sang that song, and I was just listening to Daniel talk and feeling what God was trying to lay on my heart to start with tonight. One of the things that I found out when I was kind of going back and looking up different things and looking at different commentaries and looking at what God might have laid on my heart tonight, I found out that the word that they used to describe Goliath was champion. That's what the Philistines called him. And champion, the root of it, what the definition of champion is decisive one. The reason that they called him champion was because they fully believed and they put all their trust in that if Goliath was on the battlefield, the war was already decided. That just because Goliath was there, just because Goliath came out with his armor and his massive sword and his shield bearer, that the battle had already been decided. And we sit there and we sing about getting authority from Jesus and about the things that God has done for us and the way that God is going to push us through and the way that He's going to be our champion. And I feel like we don't really think about a lot that God is the decisive one. God is the one that gets us through the battles. God's the one that fights our battles for us. And that's what we're looking at tonight. The title of the sermon is Fight Club 101. Pretty dumb, right? But I just want to sit around and focus on that entire idea about God being the one who wins the battles for us. He's the one that decides the outcome for us. And we're going to start out in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And I'm going to read verse 32 and 33. But our first point, and I'm trying to give you 3 tips tonight about how you can win your spiritual battles. And the first point is there's power in preparation. 32 says, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been fighting man from his very youth." David, we really see in these couple of verses the contrast between David and Goliath. We see, just like I talked about, the way that everyone viewed Goliath. They viewed that he was the one that was the champion. He was the deciding factor in every battle that he was in. And then we see a lowly shepherd boy named David. You see, David, his entire life, no one actually chose David. We go back and we look at the fact that whenever God tells Samuel to go to the house of Jesse, and he has to pick the man, he's going to anoint the man who's going to be the next king of Israel. And when he gets to the house, David is out. He's the shepherd, and he's out in the field, and he's watching the sheep. And Jesse brings 7 sons in front of Samuel, and he tells him, "These are my sons, these are my only boys. You can pick out of the 7 of them." And Samuel's going through, and he goes one by one down the list, and he gets to all 7 of them, and he says, "Surely this can't be all your sons." He knows God sent him there. He knows God is telling him that the next king of Israel is in the house, but he knows that none of the 7 that Jesse's put before him is the next king. So he asks Jesse, "Surely there's one more. There's got to be one more son." And Jesse remembers, "Oh yeah, I've got a son. He's the youngest of the bunch, but surely he can't be the next king of Israel because he's nothing but a shepherd boy." His own father is doubting that he has the potential to become something. We see later on, whenever we're looking through the passage, his older brother, Eliab, he has 3 brothers that are fighting in the battle, but Eliab gets word that David has showed up to bring them food and that David's running his mouth about Goliath and how he can defeat him. And Eliab becomes furious at what David's doing, and he tells him, "You got to go back home. You're not a warrior. You're not a man. You're just a boy. Shouldn't you be taking care of your little sheep?" And then we see in the scenario right here where even Saul, who's the king that won't go and face Goliath by himself, the king who has no man who will go and face Goliath, when David comes to him and says, "I'll do it," he says, "You're nothing but a boy." And I think it would have been super easy for David to let all the voices that are telling him he's not good enough, that he can't live up potential, that he's not ever going to be the one that can defeat Goliath. It would have been super easy for him to listen to all those and take it to heart and not even go down in the valley to face Goliath. And I think a lot of us have the same problem because we lose our battles before we even fight them because we've given up. The people that are pouring in your life, the people that are influencing you, the people that are trying to pour wisdom in your life, they have a huge role in the way that you look at yourself and the way that you even look at God. But David knows that God has called him. He's anointed him for a specific purpose. So he tunes it all out. The second way that you got to be prepared if you're going to fight your battles is spiritually, and we're looking at 34 through 37. This is David's reply. It says, "But David said back to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine.' And Saul replied to David, 'Go, and may the Lord be with you.'" When I was a kid, my family had traditions, and one of the traditions that we have that I still think is pretty odd and pretty funny today is every year when we turn 4 or 5, 6 years old, something like that. I have 4 siblings. I'm the fourth of 5. My parents would buy us a bike. And on that bike, you would have your training wheels. And you couldn't really do much with training wheels because if you went on mulch or you went in too much mud, you'd just bottom out and you just spin there and you'd be stuck. But we had training wheels, and we were content with that for a short period of time. And here's where tradition kicks in. Eventually, after probably a couple months, after a year of having these training wheels, we would go to our dad and say, "Hey, it's time to take them off. I want to be a big kid now. I want to actually ride my bike like everyone else does." The way that our house is set up, my parents' house, is the house is on top of a hill, and then the hill goes straight down. There's a creek and kind of a tree line, and then there's another hill that goes up. And some of you, maybe your dad did the same thing, so you know where I'm going with this. But my dad would take all of us to the top of this hill, and he would shove us. And we'd be flying down this hill. It's a pretty big yard, so we'd be flying down this hill, and for like 3.5 seconds, you feel like you're the man. Like nothing can stop you. You're finally an adult. Like you might go try for a mortgage or something like that because you can finally ride without your training wheels. And you have 2 options when you're flying down this hill. Your 2 options are to either, like I always did, to slam on your brakes and do like a gainer over your handlebars, or like all my much smarter siblings did, just to kind of fall over. But I think and my dad would probably be like crucified for this now. Like people would say he's an awful father and he's evil, and how could he do this to his kids? But I think it's important to realize, and I realize it now, I was terrified of it when I was a kid. My dad did that so that we'd be prepared to actually ride. God gives us all battles in our life. He allows battles to come into our life and things that we're having to face and giants that we're having to face. And he doesn't do it because he hates us or because he's an evil God. I think a lot of times I always hear the question, how could a loving God allow this to happen? How could a loving God allow that to happen? God's preparing you through the battles that you're going through right now for the battles that you're going to have to face down the road. David, when he's fighting this bear and he's fighting this lion, although that sounds terrifying and I'm not really sure how he survived and how he conquered them, he didn't know at that time when he's battling them that it's preparing him to battle Goliath down the road. A few months ago, we talked about a series called Scars, and I had to go to my man David Mahaffey about this because he's our resident genius when it comes to biology. But one of the cool things that I figured out about scars is scars are much stronger than average skin because they're made up of fiber. And I'm sure that David, whenever he's having to fight this bear and he's having to fight this lion, he probably got a few cuts that turn into scars. And whenever we're fighting the things that are in our life, we get spiritual and emotional scars. But the scars are toughening you up. That way, next time you go to battle, next time you have to face the giant, your skin's a little bit tougher. And some of us, and I'm not saying we're lucky, I'm trying to decide which one would be worse out of the two, but some of us are like David, and the things that we face and the things that we battle are different every single time. He went from a bear to a lion, and he ends up with Goliath, and he has to battle some other things down the road that we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes. But every single time he's battling something different. And this is where I relate, and I'm worried a lot of you relate with this. But some of us don't get the luxury of battling something different every single time. We're battling, maybe it's something that we watch, maybe it's something that we do, maybe it's something that we drink or something that we partake in. And we tell ourselves, hey, I know I've been messing up, I know I've went down a really bad road with this, but I'm going to put it down and I'm never going to return to it. And 2 weeks later, we're back doing the same exact thing. And that's something that I've struggled with my entire life, is constantly returning to the things that I told myself I was going to put down and the things that I was going to give up. But I'm telling you, just like David, he wasn't able to defeat Goliath just because he had fought a lion or a bear. A lot of us aren't able to defeat the things that are in our life just because we went through other things. The only reason that David was able to defeat Goliath is because he had God on his side. Goliath is the direct enemy of God. He's the opposition. The Israelites are God's chosen people, and Goliath's opposing them. And that's the only reason that David is allowed to defeat Goliath. You see, verse 36 says, "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. The uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God." You don't have to be fearful of things. You don't have to be terrified of things whenever you have God on your side. Which brings us to our second point. It's get off the mountain. We look at 1 Samuel 17, 39 through 44. It says, "David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried to walk around. Because he was not used to them, 'I cannot go in these,' he said to Saul, 'because I'm not used to them.' So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones, put them from the stream, put them in a pouch on a shepherd's bag with a sling in his hand, and approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with the shield bearer in front of him, kept looking closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, 'Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?' The Philistine cursed David by his gods. 'Come here,' he said, 'and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field.'" Something very odd sticks out to me here, and I didn't really notice it until I went back and listened to a few podcasts and people talking about this exact couple of verses. But if you go back and you notice, it says that David had one shepherd's staff. He had one stick. If you go back and you look at the verse, though, Goliath sees 2 sticks. And that it seems like a very small thing, and you may wonder why we're talking about it. But if you also look, Goliath was this massive warrior that everyone was terrified of. It makes no sense that he made David come to him. If he's really all that he says he is, and if he's really everything that everyone's fearful of, he should have ran to David and absolutely demolished him on the spot. It's also odd to me that Goliath is heads and shoulders, probably more than that, taller than everyone else. We think that he was 9 feet at the time. And if you also notice, he has to bring a shield bearer with him. You see, when everyone's on the mountain and all these Israelites are terrified, including King Saul, who everyone said at the time was the man who everyone on earth feared, when they're looking at Goliath, all they can see is how big he is. I think a lot of times when we look at the things in our life, the longer that we stare at them instead of staring at what God's trying to bring us through, they get a lot bigger. It's odd to me that Goliath has all this size and he has all these issues. And a lot of people think now that he had a disease called gigantism. Hence the fact that he's a giant. But he had gigantism. And one of the things that came with gigantism is they believe that it was caused by tumors in the brain. They also think his brother had this. But because of this, he had impaired vision. He saw double vision in everything. Hence the fact that he saw 2 sticks. It also would cause excessive growth hormones, which is the reason that he's so big. But it also caused him to be very slow, which is the reason that he can't go to David. David has to come to him. But it also is the reason that he had to have a shield bearer. The shield bearer is not there to protect him. The shield bearer is there to guide him through the valley. And a lot of us have battles and things that we're struggling with, and I know that they're tough, and I'm not at all discrediting the things that you've been through or the things that you're going through. But I think a lot of times when we look at our giants and we look at what they actually are, they're not always as big as we think that they are. As long as they stayed up on this mountain, Goliath had that over them. He keeps them on the mountain because they're terrified of what he can do. And I think one of the things that keeps us on the mountain is comfort. We look at verse 48. It says, as the Philistines moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. With a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. These men and Saul and everyone that's up on the mountain, they're very comfortable where they're at. Goliath's not there. He's not there. He's not going to come up on the mountain. He's not brave enough to come up on the mountain and face all of them at once. And I think they got pretty content and pretty comfortable where they were at in life. For most of you, whether you're in middle school or high school, God has things down the road for you, things that he wants to bring you into. And if you just get content with just coming to something on Wednesday nights, and you just get content with maybe reading your Bible once a week, some of us once a month, or if we even get to do that, if we even choose to do that, we get really comfortable and really content where we're at. I'm telling you, I'm a testament to this because I'm only 2 years out and I've already realized it. High school is not the best 4 years of your life. I don't care what anyone says. I don't care if you've heard a graduation speech where someone said that. High school is for sure 100% not the best 4 years of your life. There are things after high school that you need to look forward to and things that you need to look towards. And I go back and I look at the life of David, and David's just a shepherd boy. But because of the battles that he went through when he was a shepherd, it prepares him to be a warrior, which then prepares him to be commander of the army, which prepares him to be king. But if David had just been content being a shepherd and staying exactly where he was at, he never becomes king one day. He's never allowed to fully live into what God has called him into if he's content exactly where he's at. We go on, and the third point that I want to look at, the third tip that I want to give you tonight, is to never let your guard down. See, the story I was going to tell when I started the sermon tonight was about the only fight that I've ever been in. I probably wouldn't even consider it a fight. My friends probably wouldn't consider it a fight. But I'm at a basketball game, a pickup basketball game at the church that I grew up at. And it's all my friends, and there's another group of guys who showed up. But there's this one dude that all night, he's just going after it. And anytime somebody grabs the ball, anytime somebody tries to dribble the ball, he's going in full speed and hitting them and trying to take the ball away from them. And me, being the macho man that I thought I was at the time, I thought I was bigger and stronger than everyone, even though I'm terrible at basketball, decided I was going to go up and grab this rebound, and I was going to hold on to it. And no matter what he did to me, I wasn't going to let go of that ball. And if he tried again, I was just going to fight him. I had no clue how to fight. Don't really know why I chose to fight, but that's what I decided to do that night. So I grab the rebound and I come down with it, and he tries once to rip it from me. And I had a little bit of grace on him because I'm a good guy, and I was like, I'll give him one more chance. And he rips it from me the second time, and I just dropped the ball, and I didn't know how to fight, so I just shoved him as hard as I could. And everyone in the gym just kind of stopped and stared, including him. He was super confused at why I just shoved him. I didn't know what to do, so I shoved him again. And the second that my arms lock out, what I didn't know was that his best friend also came to play, the best friend that was a college lacrosse team captain. And he picks all 220 pounds of my glory up off the ground. I'm telling you, I'm like up off the ground like that. I'm just hovering over the ground, and he's looking up at me, chewing me out, saying things that I can't say from this stage. And I'm terrified, like the entire time. I didn't anticipate what was about to happen to me, and I'm grabbing on his arm so he can't punch me. Everyone's trying to separate it so he doesn't kill me. But as long as I was focused on the victory that I just had, because I brought down this rebound and I shoved him and I thought I had finally done something, I wasn't able to look at what was coming back towards me. If David had been super content at the fact that he had been anointed as king, if David had been super content at the fact that all these things were lining up for him, if he was content with the fact that he had just killed Goliath, he's not able to see what's coming next towards him. See, I debated on how to do this, but I think I want to split it up. And to the believers in the room, I want to tell you this. That David, his entire life, he goes through, like I said, he's a shepherd, and then he's a warrior, and then he's commander of the army, and then he's king. Life is great for David. Everything seems to be, if he could write out his life, everything seems to be going exactly like he would have written it out. And for 38 years, it seems this way. And then 38 years after killing Goliath, there comes a woman named Bathsheba. And Bathsheba is a woman that he's up on top of his castle, and Bathsheba is bathing. And when he looks down, he sees her, and immediately causes him to sin. He goes and he calls for her, and he tries to get her to come to him. They actually end up having a child together. He has the husband of Bathsheba killed. But David falls because of this woman. And I go back and I try to think of the two stories and look at the fact that it was David and Goliath, and now it's David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba, and I can't at all fathom how a little boy is able to defeat a giant, but a grown man can't just say no to one woman. He almost loses everything because of this woman. And what I think it was, and I think what it comes down to, is he had just been anointed king, and he is on fire for God. Goliath seemed super simple for David to kill, super simple for him to walk down in that valley and take control of, because he was so on fire for God. And I think about the ways that we go on camps. Maybe it was Girls Retreat just a couple of weekends and you made a decision there. Maybe it was Voyager or Collide or Kentucky. And you went and you made a decision. You said, you know what, God, I'm done with this. I'm laying this down. I'm never going to return to it. And just like David, he gets further and further and further over the years away from the decision that he made to live in complete surrender by God, to be used by God. And the further that he gets away from that, the easier it becomes to fall. I don't know if that applies to anyone in the room tonight, but I know that it applied to me when I was in high school. And I think about the ways that I went on trips and I decided, hey, maybe I need to break up with this girl when I get back. Maybe I need to separate from this friend group. Maybe I need to stop watching this. Maybe I need to stop drinking this. Maybe I just need to get away from all these things that I'm struggling with. And then 2, 3, 4 weeks later, whenever I distanced myself from the fire that God had put in my heart, I fell right back to it. And the other group of people that I want to talk to in the room tonight will be non-believers. You see, David doesn't win this battle, like I said, because of anything that he did on his own accord. He doesn't win it because he was mentally or spiritually trained. He doesn't win it because he fought a bear, he fought a lion, whatever you could say. He doesn't win it because of a slingshot. David wins because he carried God into the valley with him. A lot of you, maybe it's your first time tonight. Maybe you've never really done the whole church thing, if that's the way we want to word it. You've never really had a commitment or a time in your life where you ask God to come into your heart, to live inside of you. And you feel like day after day after day, you're walking straight into the valley. You're doing it by yourself, and Goliath's sitting there waiting on you. Maybe it's the same Goliath every time. Maybe it's different Goliaths, and you feel like you go down and you get hurt spiritually, emotionally, mentally. You're getting hurt. And you're walking back to the mountain, and the second you get back to the mountain, Goliath's still standing there. He's asking you to come back. And you're getting tired of battling Goliath. And I think we try to convince ourselves a lot that if we just stick on the mountain, maybe if we just stay there and we stop trying to return to the valley, that all the problems will go away. Goliath stays there for 40 days. He wasn't going anywhere. He was there for 40 days taunting the people of Israel until David finally goes out and defeats him. He kills him. One thing that's super cool, if we're looking over the story of David and Goliath, is that after Goliath is hit in the forehead with a stone and he falls down, it says he falls down on his face. The only time up to this point in the Bible that we see anyone falling down on his face, it shows that they're completely surrendering and worshiping God. And I'm not really sure if that's exactly what we're supposed to be looking at here, but I do know that there's never a word that returns void in the Bible. There's never a word that we shouldn't pay attention to. I think it's important to realize that whenever David carries God into the battle with him, into the valley with him, the thing that he was terrified of, the thing that everyone there was terrified of, is face down before God and all of his people. So I'm going to ask you to bow your heads. And tonight, when we talk about believers in the room, when we talk about the camps that we may have been on, the things we may have done, and how we were fully ready to leave everything behind, but as time went on, we start to return back to those things. Maybe that's some of you here tonight. And you're tired of trying to go down in the valley every single day and battle the things that no one else knows about, your best friends don't know about, your small group leader doesn't know about, your parents don't know about. Sometimes we convince ourselves that maybe God doesn't even know about. And we think we've got it all figured out. Maybe if I just keep on going back to the valley day after day after day, that the problems will just go away eventually. That if I start dating this person, they'll go away. That if I start hanging out with this friend group, they'll go away. Maybe tonight Just like David does in Psalms 51, where he repents and he turns back to God. It's a night where you need to turn back to God. And the second group of people in the room are the non-believers. And when we talk about going back to the valley every single day and you're doing it by yourself and you're getting tired and you don't want to bother anyone else with your problems, you don't want to go and you don't want to be the person that feels like they whine all the time, maybe tonight you need to go back to the valley for the last time. And you need to bring God with you. I'm not saying that there's never going to be giants. I'm not saying there's never going to be battles that you're ever going to have to fight again. But I am telling you, for the first time, you're going to be victorious over them. And it's not by anything that you did. It's because you had God in you. So if tonight, for the first time, you want to make that decision, and you want to say, you know what, Thomas, you're right. I am tired, and I want to bring God with me. I'm going to ask you to repeat this prayer after me. God, I see what you've done in David's life. I see what you've done in the lives of those around me. And God, tonight, I want to fully surrender to you. God, I'm tired. God, I'm hurting. But God, I want to live into who you've called me to be. God, I believe that you sent your son, Jesus, to die on this earth for my sins, not for his own, for my sins. God, I believe and I confess that I'm a sinner and that I fall short every single day. And God, I know that the only way to eternal life is through the blood of your Son. If you prayed that prayer tonight for the very first time, if you rededicated your life to God tonight, maybe for the 100th time, no one's looking around. I'm going to ask you just to make eye contact with me real quick. It's kind of hard with the light shining in my eyes, so if you did that tonight, I can't really see the eyes. I'm going to ask you just to slip your hand up with no one looking around. Father God, we thank you for tonight. God, we thank you for what you're doing in this room, in the student ministry, God. God, we thank you for stories like David and Goliath, where we have reminders that it doesn't matter how big the enemy is, it doesn't matter how much they may call him a champion, it doesn't matter how intimidating it may be, when we carry you into the battle with us, God, it means nothing. The enemy doesn't have a hold over us anymore, God. The enemy doesn't have a way of defeating us anymore, God, because of who you are. Not because of who we are, but because of who you are, God. So we thank you for tonight, God. I pray that you're with us through this time of worship, God. God, and I pray that you would just have your way in this room tonight. In your holy name, amen.